Hey, I just wanted to record a quick screencast to show you some features of Browsersync. The most common way that you're going to encounter Browsersync is in a project that's already got it set up as part of some build tools. So here I have a basic WordPress project with the 10up scaffold installed. So I'm just going to, I've already npm installed the dependencies. I'm just going to hit npm run watch, and that will start it up. I've taken the liberty of just throwing a few images in here. It's a pretty bare bones site, not particularly interesting. So the way that you're probably familiar with Browsersync working is doing stuff like live updating. So for instance, we can come in here, change the max width on this container, and after a few seconds it will reflect there. The CSS will be injected. Another very useful thing about Browsersync is that you can use it to have multiple pages in sync with each other. So there's not enough content on here, so I'm just going to go into here and generate a whole bunch of nonsense. So if I refresh that, we should have a whole load of content. Cool. And now you can see that they scroll in sync. If we go up here, then you can also see when we initialized it, there were some external URLs provided. So obviously on our local computer we can access this site via localhost, but if we use another device, say a mobile browser, a mobile device like a phone or a tablet that's on our local network, we can access this same site via this URL. This is really essential for testing mobile behavior. Another URL that's provided is this UI URL. I'm just going to click on this to show you what this looks like. And what this is, it's very easy for you to never see this, but it's got some very useful things in there. I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but the sync options are very useful. This lets you turn on and off, say, the automatic injection and refreshing and scroll mirroring. So now I've turned that off. If I do that, we don't see it mirrored on the other browser, and so on and so forth. That is a little CSS bug. We have this is also quite handy. Browsersync records a history of the URLs that have been used in this session, and you can sync all the devices to one URL. At the moment we only have one, but I'm sure you can see that be useful. I'll come on to this later. This is quite a handy little feature. There are maybe better ways to do this these days, but this just automatically injects some CSS onto the page to give you a brief outline. Sometimes this can be handy if you've got some layout issues. And this has a grid like so, and you can adjust these options here. But the thing I really want to talk about was the network throttling. This is an absolute killer feature. So Browsersync is essentially a proxy server that's running, serving up whatever you provide for it. And as that proxy server, it can throttle the network traffic. This is a much truer representation of slow network than, say, the Chrome or Firefox DevTools, because it's actually a network level or close to network level throttle. So if we do this, I'm just going to pick good 2G because that's definitely slow, and we create a new server. What this has done is this has provided another port on the same server, so we can still be testing it at our normal unthrottled speed, but we can also test it at this throttled speed. And this has already revealed something very different. Whereas on this one, where it's just serving it from my local computer, This one with a throttled download speed shows that these images are really heavy and very slow. And if we have a look at one, we can actually see, well, it's not even finished, so I can't, trust me, they're very big. So you can imagine how doing this sort of testing with, say, JavaScript files is amazing, because you can really see how a slow device, well, so a slow connection can affect the usability of a site. And obviously you can create a whole bunch of these and have them just, well, there's a problem with the scrolling here, but you can just have a whole bunch of these created and test on all sorts of different types of connections. This one will take an absolute age. And you can see on this one that it's not just the images that are slow, the whole page load was slow. And if we go to the network tab and just even that initial page load was 1.5 seconds, even on this very, very simple page. So hopefully you can see how that is actually a really useful tool. Another thing that you can do is add some extra features to browsers. Well, use some of Browsersync's extra features. Let's have a look in the gulp file. So first off, I just wanted to show you a really handy tool, which is the rewrite rules. This will use regex to match something, whatever you ask it to, and replace it with something. Have a look on the Browsersync documentation site. So it's just browsersync.io, and have a look in here for more options, but this is a really good start. So as you might imagine, this will search for any string on the page and replace it with the word kittens. So not only do we have it here in the body of the page, we even have it in the title, because it's just doing find and replace on the HTML. There is a side effect of this, however, because the URL that I was looking for was browsersync.test. It's now tried to replace that to kittens.test. So to make this work, we'd have to do a more restrictive regex. I will leave that as an exercise to someone else. Another thing that's worth being aware of are the different options in the Browsersync API. For instance, if we come down to the gulp file, I've added an extra task in the CSS process. We can add a customer notification here of compiling CSS, please wait. You'll notice I've passed in some HTML, so you can see that it supports that as well. So now if I, well, and in fact, let's turn off the automatic opening, and you can come down here to see which option that is. So now if we open that, we don't get a new browser tab. We can just reuse the same one. So just to recap, I've used the notify method on the API to create a custom notification that is fired when the CSS processing happens. And just to show you what that, just to prove that works, so you have a custom notification there. So this could be handy if you have multiple different tasks that can happen. You can notify people that CSS is compiling, that JavaScript is compiling, and so on, so that they are assured of what's going on. Especially if you have some fairly slow or long-running tasks. So here's a different kind of example where you want to use Browsersync outside of a large project. For instance, here we have a plain HTML file, almost as basic as you can get. an empty CSS file, an empty JavaScript file. Notice that CSS and JavaScript are not even referenced in this file. So at the moment, I'm just referring to it by its full path, which is fine, but we can do a bit more. Here I'm going to use a globally installed instance of Browsersync. So to do that, you can just do npm install global Browsersync, like so. I already have it, so I'm just going to type in Browsersync and nothing else. Browsersync's smart enough to know that an index.html file in the same directory is probably what you want. So it's served this directory, and we can view it. We can view it from external devices as well. Now if I start editing this, we'll notice we don't get live updates. That's because you do actually have to explicitly tell Browsersync to start watching stuff. You can just do that by passing the W flag. Now it's connected, and we get live updates. This means that we can start a very, very basic project and have a nice development environment from the off. So let's just get this going. Now we have that loaded, and we can do stuff like get nice live CSS injection. Well, that's horrible. And let's make the font a bit nicer. Max width of, I don't know, 400 pixels. And let's center the whole thing. And there we go, just super quick, nice live updates. And obviously we can do this with the JavaScript as well. Let's put it at the bottom because we're good citizens. And now we can do something like console.log hello, and we get that updating live. Don't have to go over and touch refresh. And remember, all of this is stuff that you can see on other devices that you have linked up with the same URL. It's really great for rapid development. Now, remembering that command line command might be a bit laborious every time. So one quick and easy way is to use a pre-built configuration. You can do Browsersync init, and that will create a config file. This config file has every single option that you can set, all with their default properties. So let's just set watch to be true and server to be true. And now you can use the command that it gives you here. And we have a nice reproducible Browsersync project. Even better, let's do npm init, create all of those, and then npm install Browsersync locally. And inside here we can have a start, or I might need to load my changes there. I shouldn't have been editing that at the same time. So we can start with that command, and now you can just do npm start. And because it's running from inside npm, a user just needs to run npm install, and now you have a project-specific version of Browsersync that they're running, rather than your global one. So this is the global one's a great way of setting up these projects, and then that means that other users don't need to have it installed. There is another handy little feature of Browsersync called recipes. So just to show you, I'm in a completely empty directory here. There is another very handy feature of Browsersync called recipes. Just to show you, I'm in a completely empty directory here. So I can run the Browsersync recipe command. And what that will do is show you all the potential recipes that you can use. To view these, you can go to the Browsersync site, go to documentation and go to recipes. And this will list all of the potential recipes here. What these are essentially project starter points. So for instance, let's say we want a Webpack and TypeScript project. So we can go to Browsersync, recipe, webpack.typescript. And what this will do is create a new folder that's already set up to go. So let's go into that folder, install and start. This will install all the dependencies needed and start the project any second now. So let's have a look. Here we go. I don't know who Frank is, but maybe they're the one who set them up. And just to prove that this works, here we go. And as you can see, this is a TypeScript project. PHP Storm even wants to start fiddling with it. So that's a really nice way of starting up some relatively complex projects without having to worry about build systems. If you like, you can go here and follow the instructions to go to the Git repo and contribute your own recipes. There's a list of them here. You can see that they are just folders under this recipes repo on the Browsersync organization. And if you think that some of them need updating or you want to contribute your own recipes, please do so. Last but not least, I'm going to show you one of the coolest features of Browsersync, which is serving static files over a remote website. Let's see what this means. Say we want to go and edit a pre-existing WordPress site, but we don't have the database, we don't have all of the source files. Maybe we're remote in a wrong part of the world to where the project leads are, so we will have to wait another 6 hours to get those files. Well, if we're just working with CSS and JavaScript, there are a few different ways that we can do that. We can edit the files in the DevTools, and that will give us a pretty decent representation of what's going on. But there's a more powerful way of doing it, more reproducible and a nicer development experience, and that's using this feature in Browsersync. So I've got the 10-app website here. This is running remotely. I don't have this running locally on my computer. And let's say we want to use our own CSS file. I've just done that so you'll be able to see the very stark difference. The path of the file is just copied from the path here after that root point. You can, there are ways of making that simpler, but I've just done that for making a setup fairly straightforward. So, first things first, you can actually do this from the command line. You can do Browsersync proxy and then do, I think it's, let's check on the Browsersync docs. Serve static. And inside here you can put WP content, and you can also pass files, and you're telling it where to replace from. So for instance, I could just have a CSS folder here, so, but in this case I'm going to do WP content. And what Browsersync does is it looks down every time it gets a request, it first looks to see if it can resolve it locally. If it can, it gives you back that file. If not, it will return the one from the network, which means that you get transparent overriding of remote content locally. So let's try this. Oh, we also need to put start at the beginning. Apologies for the slow movement of cursors there. There we go. Now, because I'm trying to access a secure site, Firefox is correctly complaining. So I'm just going to have a security exception there. So we have something. We have the 10up site, but we don't have any custom CSS. This is because it's not just, the file name isn't just 10up.min.css, it's 10up.min.css with this query parameter after it. That's annoying. So we actually have to do a little bit more to get around that. Let's do a browser sync init. And now we can set up some of these same parameters in this file. So in serve static, you make a new thing here. Let's just pop into the options to serve static. So the first one is proxy, and that's going to be snap.com. And what we want to do, a few different ways of doing it. I think this one's the cleanest. So I'm just going to, oh, actually, what have I done? I put that in the wrong place. Let's just do the proxy. There is what needs to be https.10up.com. And we want to make use of those rewrite rules that we saw earlier. Here they are. So let's check out how those work again. So here you pass in an option and an object. The first property is match, and that one needs to be a regex. So in this we want to match question mark version equals and a string of numbers. So I happen to have looked this up beforehand. So you'd want to do question mark, and that needs to be escaped, equals a word character and any one of those. There we go. And we just want to replace that with nothing. So that should hopefully suffice. Let's open to, I'll leave that as is. So now we can use this with that same command that we saw earlier and check if it's working. It is not working. We probably have a problem in our regex. So I'm just going to grab, in fact, let's grab it a bit longer. My favorite way of trying to debug this is on regexer, and let's pass in this bad boy. Right, that we've already got, right, here we are. Just got to type in ver. Whoops. Leave that behind. Restart Browsersync. And we have wiped out that query parameter. Right, so let's go to serve static, and what we want to do is set that to WP content and replace it with WP content. We'd have to restart Browsersync. And now we're using our local CSS file with a background red. So let's try to change the background to blue. Let's spell our colour correctly. But we don't get any live updates. That's because we haven't set watch to be true. So let's do that. Restart Browsersync again. We have our blue file. Turn it back to red. Now you can see that we have a red file, but when I change it to blue, we don't have any live update. Even though we've set watch to be true, there's nothing happening. That's because Browsersync doesn't know which files to watch at the moment. It's too far in directory. It's not been specified. We're not providing these files. So that's fine, we can do that. You can see over here there are a few different ways we can do it. The simplest way is just to provide a string. So wcontent /theme /10up set 2016 assets css /10up.min.css. Bit of a mouthful, but hopefully, fingers crossed, now we open that, we should be able to get a live update. So this is really powerful because every other thing from here, including the HTML, is coming from the remote website, actual10up.com. This is all the content on there, but we have completely overwritten the CSS. In reality, what you're more likely to do is copy and paste the remote CSS into your directory and then make changes as you need them. Unfortunately in this case I've picked something with minified CSS. So it's a little harder to use, but for instance here we might want to override the colour of the header nav. Let's see where that's set. Somewhere deep in here probably. So you have to do a little bit of work. Go to those few elements. Oh, here we go. So page header. So let's look for page header. There we go, background. Let's change that to wheat. And there we go. Or almond. Blanched almond perhaps. Very close to wheat. Anyway, so not only do we get that live and saved in a file that we can reproduce and get to again and again, we can also get to it with another browser. So I'm just going to open up a private window there. I have to get past the self-signed cert. But now we have another browser synced up to this one with these changes applied. And even better, we can see changes in both of them at once, which, as you can imagine, is fantastic when you're using a mobile device. So I realised that last example was a little bit convoluted, but I wanted to show you what some real-world applications of this are and how you might solve some of the things you would actually see in the real world, like complicated file names and so on. I hope that was useful, and if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. I will try and help as best I can, and I hope this has given you some ideas about how to use this tool, and I hope it makes your development life easier and happier.